The single most important piece of advice that I could give to any artist is to read books. Read books specifically on how to make art. Read books that are relevant to the art that you want to make. So that means if you are a figurative artist, for example, then you're going to want to find books on figure drawing. You're going to want to find anatomical textbooks or books about anatomical sketching. Pretty much every artist needs to study color theory, so I would definitely recommend getting a book on color theory. If you're a painter, for instance, I would definitely get a book that's not only about color theory, but is about pigments as well, because pigments have their own dimension to it, their own properties that are important. There's a history there that's important as well. So I'm going to share with you some of the books that I use and some of the books that I use on a regular basis. But what I would suggest is to buy books on art, find books in general and start collecting them, start reading them, start studying from them. Reading is an incredibly important tool in developing skills as an artist. I've taken years and years of college courses on drawing and painting and sculpture, and there are instances where what I read in a book that I got at Barnes & Noble outside of school was infinitely more helpful to me than the entirety of my semester at college. Drawing Lessons from the Great Masters is a wonderful book. Covers many different aspects of drawing and painting, and it does so by analyzing in great detail a huge number of drawings from some of the best artists in history. I would highly recommend this book. The Oil Painter's Color Handbook. I use this all the time. I keep this in my studio and I use it every time I paint. I read it when I'm not painting to learn, but I will constantly come back to this and refer to it as I'm making a painting. It teaches you about color theory, but it also teaches you about various pigments and how they interact with each other, what are good combinations of pigments, what are good approaches to mixing pigments, what are good studio practices with mixing paints. It's really just a wonderful guide in terms of your studio practice with mixing different colors and how to set up a palette, how to limit a palette, how to unlimit a palette. And it also goes in very good detail about the history of pigments. And that's one thing that a lot of painters don't really seem to think about, in my experience, is that when you use a pigment, there is a history attached to that pigment, and there is a style attached to that pigment. There's an era of art history that's attached to various pigments and various palettes. And this book actually will, go through and explain to you, these are the pigments that were available for painters to use in this period of time, and this is how those pigments were made. And that information is totally relevant and very important, because if you're trying to study an artist in history that you're a huge fan of, and you're going to need to know what were the pigments that this guy was using, or woman. And this book is extremely helpful when it comes to that. And like I said, it covers the color theory aspect as well, and that's a very helpful book. Traditional Oil Painting is another one of my favorites. This one actually analyzes and teaches you the artistic practices of academic painters, Renaissance painters, specifically the Flemish method and the Venetian method. So, basically indirect painting in layers. And it covers on other important subjects. There's some overlap in a lot of these books in terms of learning about light and shadow and value and color theory and things like that. So, but in terms of academic artwork, this one is very good. Figure Drawing for All It's Worth by Andrew Loomis. This is an incredibly important book, and you'd be surprised how useful it is for traditional artists. There's a lot of people that are, using the Loomis method to create cartoons and comics and things like that, but there's a direct lineage between the methods of the Renaissance painters and what Andrew Loomis is doing. They're not very different. A lot of the Renaissance guys basically studied proportions of the human body, the face, and so on, and used that to not only draw and paint from live models, but to paint the figure from invention, and that's an incredibly important skill. So this covers drawing from life, drawing from invention, and also perspectives for shortening. Lots of things that figurative artists tend to overlook as well, like particularly when it comes to perspective. Like there's there's a method in this book that enables you to put figures in a space together in such a way that there is actual continuity, that it actually makes sense, that this figure and this figure are occupying the same space. Instead of the proportions being off, instead of one figure just floating over here and another figure, you're just kind of guessing if it's the right size or not. Loomis actually gives you really good methods to make sure that your work looks perfect. The Artist Master Series Composition and Narrative, also a really wonderful book, which, as you can tell from the title, discusses composition and narrative. So there's going to be parts of that, involved in how to create an image, how to organize an image, but also how to tell a story with an image. And there are so many ways of doing that, and that's what you're going to find in here. The last book I'm going to show you is this, which is a medical textbook, because medical textbooks tend to go a little bit further into detail in terms of anatomy versus a book about anatomy for artists. And there are resources out there for like medical students and stuff like that, that can help you to view the various systems of the body in 3 dimensions and so on, but a lot of those cost money, and I tend to prefer working from books. Yeah, medical textbooks, probably the closest you're going to get to working from a cadaver like a Da Vinci. So those are my recommendations on reading material. I have many other books, and I continue to collect them, and I continue to study from them, and I'm sure I'll recommend more to you. But if you take nothing from this video, I simply must recommend the practice of reading books about art and incorporating that into your studio practice, because I just don't see artists doing it very much. I don't think that I ever really saw someone at art school. I mean, I'm not the most sociable person, but I don't recall ever seeing people with books in their studios, and I never took a studio class where a single book was seen, and that's like highly concerning to me. Like, books are how you learn things primarily. I mean, there's many ways to learn things, but books they should not be discredited in any way. They are a wonderful tool for artists especially, so I would encourage you to read books.